Back in 1995 is a game with a very honest and pure ambition. It's a throwback to a different age in gaming, harkening back to the days of games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dino Crisis. In the developer's own words, this game was created in order to recreate the golden age of game development culture, a time of innovation, where gamers were continually being provided with new gaming experiences. The novelty and wonder of these experiences was enhanced even further if you were a kid back then, in the late 90s or early 2000s. Think of the first time you tried the first Resident Evil as a kid. Even if you got hopelessly stuck after only an hour of playtime, or if you halfway shit yourself at the first zombie encounter, always present was a certain feeling of wonder at just how cool all this was, and how great games were, and how they make you feel. I still feel that sense of wonder occasionally nowadays, most notably with top tier open world games like Red Dead 2, The Witcher 3, and Horizon Zero Dawn. Not Forbidden West though, I fucking hated that.
Okay. So by that logic, what's stopping me from killing you right now? And taking what I need to save everyone?
But let's stay on track. Although there are fantastic games nowadays amongst a sea of bland garbage, I think we're long past any golden age in gaming. When kids today play the latest Call of Duty, Far Cry or Fortnite update, do they feel that same level of wonder that we felt the first time we saw Nemesis? Or when we ran over prostitutes in Grand Theft Auto 3? Such wonder. But again, I'm getting way off track. We're here today to talk about back in 1995. And, I don't like it. I think it's shit. The game starts with our protagonist, Kent, standing on a rooftop, staring at a tower highlighted off in the distance. There's very little setup right off the bat, but we have our goal. We have to get to that tower. Upon descending from the roof, we encounter our first enemy. But having no weapons, we've no choice but to run to the first door we see and get in to escape from whatever the fuck that was. We enter a room with only a table and an answering machine.
You have one voice message. Welcome.
My head.
Kent wakes up in a doctor's office and is introduced to a man calling himself GP, explaining that he's barricaded himself on the top floor due to the monsters. What the hell are all these monsters? All we know is that they just appeared and started attacking people one day. Since then, several survivors have secured themselves on the upper floors and roofs of buildings, transporting supplies to each other via wires. However, the wires are currently down. In the meantime, we've got to get to the proper roof, get rid of the monsters up there, and check on the AC unit. This all pretty much serves as the intro to the game, and now that we've got a weapon, we can actually get playing. Let's talk about how the game feels. It's tank controls we're dealing with here, of course it is, and so nothing too experimental. They feel particularly sluggish here though, probably due to how weird Kent looks when turning. Look at his dumb head. As well as basic movement, we have combat mechanics, and I guess they kinda resemble Silent Hill's, except way slower. Kinda excessively slow, if you ask me. The first weapon we get our hands on is the wrench. Although we'll pick up a pistol and shotgun later on, the wrench is our melee weapon of choice and is most effective when up against these chicken breast enemies, for lack of a better term. 3 hits and they're done. They're easy to beat too, as they only have 1 attack, and they'll telegraph it with an audio cue whenever they're about to strike out. Bait, retreat, beat, repeat. These are the most common enemy in the game, and really shouldn't give you too much trouble. I myself never died to them. As well as the big potato monsters, there are other even weirder enemies, such as these long-legged ones, which I also didn't die to. And then these fucking crazy looking massive... what the hell even is this? Honestly, I don't think I've ever played a game where the enemies are so difficult to describe. They're really weird looking, but don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. I think the enemy designs are the best thing about the game. I like monsters where I look at them and can't tell exactly what they are. It makes me want to know more about them, even the sweet potatoes. Although I mentioned the wrench being best used for these more common enemies, for the other enemy types, the handgun or shotgun are safest to use. This game isn't stingy at all when it comes to handing out ammo either. You'll find tons of it, even for the shotgun, and so don't be too shy about using it. This is not a long game at all either, and there's no difficult final encounter to be saving up for, so go crazy, go wild. While the wrench can be used by just pressing the attack button, your guns have to be aimed first. Again, this all works pretty much the same as it did in classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I mostly didn't have much trouble with the aiming, and there weren't too many frustrating misses, apart from when fighting one particular enemy type. Presenting the... again, what the fuck is this? These things are terrible. Again, really cool, weird design, but fighting them is a nightmare. If you let them get too close to you, you're mostly fucked. You won't have a chance to fire off shots due to the animation being interrupted by their attacks, and when you do manage to get a shot off, it'll tend to miss due to them being right up in your business. Even trying to back up to create some space between you and them doesn't work because they can move faster than you can back up. Turning around also isn't an option because this is Tank City, and you turn way too slow to accomplish anything by doing this. The best way to deal with them is to take them out quick with the shotgun before they reach you. Luckily they don't have much health and they don't do much damage, but damn, this enemy just flat out sucks. Perhaps the dev did this intentionally. It's not like classic survival horror games are strangers to annoying enemies, often made full on obnoxious due to tank controls. I'm looking at you, monkeys from Resident Evil 0. But this was some nostalgia I really could have done without. As well as combat, you'll be navigating through the game's various levels in order to reach your final destination, the tower. There's not too much variety in the levels you explore, with it primarily being office environments and roofs you'll traverse. Very exciting. Although there is also a decent power room type area, though it kinda comes out of nowhere. Expect to have to explore every inch of these areas, often hugging the walls, frantically tapping on the interact button to make sure to not miss any hidden items, ammos, keys or clues. There are even a few puzzles requiring 3-digit passcodes to be worked out from environmental clues, like remembering 437 here on this whiteboard to open a door in the next hallway. Anytime you see a file with numbers on it though, take a photo, as you may need that info for a puzzle, and the game doesn't let you view previously collected files or notes for some reason. There's also no map in this game, and while the levels aren't particularly complex, I did often find myself getting a wee bit lost, wandering through the same sections of levels in an attempt to reach my next destination. I think some blame should be placed on the atrocious graphics for this. Something about them just makes it a bit harder than it should be to remember the layouts of the areas. I think by far the worst area in the game though is this large section on the roof near the end. It's terrible, and after some nonsensical dialogue with a woman in the dining room, I literally wandered around for about half an hour before resorting to looking up a walkthrough to find out what the hell I was supposed to do here. Well, in one of the rooms you pick up a crank. There's always a crank. Guess what object you're supposed to use this crank on? If you said a drawer, then you're absolutely correct. Why the fuck would you use a crank on a drawer though? I genuinely can't tell if this was supposed to be some sort of ironic commentary or joke on crank puzzles in survival horror games. Either way, it annoyed me. In the drawer is a letter. Enemies now spawn in the area and you've got to clear them and find more and more letters in the different rooms here before the final door clicks open. Now obviously, unless you're blind, you can see that this isn't really a fast-paced game, but the pacing grinds to a bloody halt here. Although I hadn't really been enjoying the experience up until this point in the game, this area really sucked. There's a lot of files to read here, but this whole section is a chore. I'll explain just what this game is all about later, but let's first address the elephant in the room. The graphics. They're terrible. They're so bad that it's perplexing. It's like the dev went out of his way to make it look shitty. It's obvious what he was going for here. He was trying to tap into that nostalgic style of classic survival horror. Except older survival horror games didn't really look like this, so the game ends up not tapping into anything. I mean, look at this. The way a lot of the textures move and warp in relation to the position of Kent is really unpleasant to look at. It looks so bad that I suspect that it's at least partly intentional. I guess the character models aren't quite as unpleasant to look at, and as I mentioned, I really do like the enemy designs, but there's nothing to like about the style chosen for the environments. Although most of this game's plot, what little of it there is explained through files and letters dotted throughout the game, especially towards the end where it dumps a ton of them on you. It actually does have some dialogue. The protagonist, Kent, encounters 3 different characters throughout the game, although calling in characters is a bit of a stretch. There's GP, Harris, and Alfreda. There's a short bit of dialogue when you encounter these folk.
So you finally come to.
Where am I?
And then the game does this really weird thing where it cuts to them talking via on-screen text, and then returns back to the cutscene for them to deliver a bit more spoken dialogue.
Take a left as soon as you're out on the roof. It'll be in the very back. Grab that red.
It's a really confusing creative choice. I mean, why not just have them deliver all the lines? Was the budget that tight? It's not like there's a lot of lines. Or even just making it all text-based. Going halfway just makes it kinda off-putting. The purpose of these characters is only really to give Kent a little bit of info regarding what's actually going on, and then to send him on some laughably shitty task, like retrieve a folder for me, or open that fence for me. I'm not even joking, these are actual tasks. And in the case of the woman you meet near the end, she literally doesn't give you any task at all. From what I see, there's literally no purpose to her being here. She just asks you to stay and look at her plants, and then after you use the crank on the dumb drawer, let's not go through the crank nonsense again, she pisses off and you never see her again. Kent himself is also voice acted, and unfortunately it's really bad, even worse than the other characters. Have a taste.
Hey there. You want me to wait?
That's right. Just sit tight.
Actually, I gotta be somewhere.
Zero emotion or effort was put into these lines, and it probably would have been better if they didn't bother with the voice acting at all. I know survival horror games are no stranger to borderline shitty voice acting, but this ain't it. I mentioned how I like the enemy designs, and I think the one other thing I sort of like here is the music. Although I was quite clear in explaining my distaste for this game's aesthetic, the music does fit this aesthetic well. It's quite simple, lonely and a bit sad, although there's not too much of it, and what there is loops a lot and so can get a little bit repetitive. I know I'm not exactly selling it, but the music is okay. Or at least it's not as bad as everything else on over here. That's something, isn't it? I guess the last thing to talk about is the plot. Spoilers here, I guess. We've already covered how our main character finds himself on a rooftop, determined to reach that strange tower in the distance. Well, most of the game really does just involve you navigating through the levels to reach that tower. The three other voiced characters don't really hold much significance to the plot either, they're just there to direct you on your way. The only explanation that you can glean about these bizarre monsters is from a few files dotted through the game, talking about an explosion at the UK 1K research lab, a facility undergoing research into the fourth dimension in an attempt to solve the world's energy problems. It's hinted that this explosion could have been intentional, as a scientist at the lab went missing afterwards and was wanted for questioning. Shortly afterwards, people started reporting sightings of strange creatures, which we can assume was the beginning of the end, bringing us to our current situation. That really is about as far as the explanation for the monsters goes. Shit went bad at a research lab, and now there's creatures from another dimension roaming around. Correct. The thing is, the game isn't really about these monsters. It's about Kent. There are a few times where Kent will hear some broken up voice, seemingly trying to communicate with him. It's all a mystery as to who this is or what it means, up until the game starts feeding us files in the rooftop area, just before we reach the tower. Instead of the reading material being related to the monsters, the research facility, or containing hints to a puzzle, we're reading letters about our character, Kent. Kent is ill and has been for some time. He has brain damage and violent tendencies, and has a condition where his mind is stuck in the year 1995. Any exposure to anything made after 1995 is completely foreign to him, causing him to lash out. It's also kinda hinted that Kent might be the one who had something to do with the explosion at the UK 1K facility, although this kinda confused me because the files where we read about the explosion refers to Dr. Randall as a she, but then Kent is referred to as Mr. Randall, so not too sure what's going on there. I'll be honest, I don't have a good grasp of what the fuck's happening regarding this. It may be a writing mistake, or I might simply be missing something. After reading all the files here, we enter this final door and inexplicably find ourselves transported to the tower. And then we read this final letter, this time from Kent himself. It's addressed to his daughter, Alyssa. She's that mysterious voice we've been hearing through the game. Kent walks to the edge of the tower, voice thick with emotion.
Forgive me, Alyssa. It's all over now.
And leaps. However, that's not quite the end, as we get some more letters from Kent's daughter Alyssa. She explains that she tried giving her dad a games console in an attempt to improve his condition, except this only made it worse, and in his brain damaged state, he started believing that he was actually the character in a game, fighting monsters and trying again and again to beat it, desperately trying to make a difference, or to fix something. Alyssa then stopped letting Kent play games altogether. However, the doctor thinks it might be worth a shot to let him try one last time. Maybe something will be different this time. And with that, the game loops, and we find ourselves back at the start, staring off at that same tower in the distance. We go through the same old motions, running by that same monster at the beginning, and then through that same door, except this time, something's a little bit different. Wasn't there an answering machine then before? There's a flashlight this time. Upon turning it on, something changes. Kent begins to snap out of his spell, becoming more self-aware. From here on, you fight your way back through the game's levels, fighting those same enemies, picking up letters containing Kent's own thoughts on his situation, his condition, and his fate. Things get quite philosophical. I guess you be the judge. The last letter we read seems to hint that Ken has finally let go, presumably passing on after letting go of his fantasy. My interpretation of this whole final section is that none of this has really happened. The monsters, the characters we met, it was all just a part of Kent's fantasy, conjured up in his brain-damaged mind, leading to something of an awakening before finally letting go. And that's the plot of the game, I think. I guess the twist near the end was kinda interesting, except the execution of the whole game just does not cut it. It's all too bare bones. We're given no reason to connect to Kent as a character. His voice acting, what little of it there actually is utterly wooden, and his interactions with the other characters shows no personality whatsoever. He may as well have been playing as a dummy. When we read the letters at the end, both the ones about and from Kent, they may as well be talking about a totally different character. The philosophical tone adopted towards the end was also a little bit too pretentious in my view, undercut by some really bad writing. It was trying way too hard to be deep, whereas it should have just tried harder to be more enjoyable. While some people might appreciate the ending, I think actually sticking to the whole monsters from a different dimension thing might have been better. I want to know more about this thing. I don't really care about this. Back in 1995 had noble ambitions. It aimed to recreate the gaming experience of a bygone era, but in my view, it failed, and any resemblance it has to those classics of yesteryear was very quickly dispelled. Now I don't want to be overly harsh on the game because obviously it wasn't made by some big studio. It was one guy with an idea, and he went and did it with a really cool ambition. Unfortunately, I just think it falls short in a lot of areas, and I found it to be a very shallow experience. Nonetheless, if you think back in 1995 looks kinda interesting, don't let me stop you from picking it up. Maybe it'll be for you. Cheers for watching, and cheerio.